Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about the politics of the closing of the comic book shops. So, of course, we right now are in the middle of the 316 era. The coronavirus has shut down huge tracts of America. Rough. It has been very, very challenging. Um, there have been some incredibly costly so there really have been some incredibly costly effects to the 316 era. Everything we've lost because of coronavirus. Um, First and foremost, of course, there's the human cost. There have been human lives that have been lost to this situation. As always, my condolences to everyone who's lost anybody due to coronavirus. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about coronavirus at the. I'm going to talk about coronavirus at the macro level. What does it mean for our politics, right? So we are going to talk about it in the aggregate. Just want to, I never want to be dismissive of how important the losses to coronavirus have been. But there have been some social, some cultural, and some political losses. I want to talk about the closing of the comic book shops from the red, white, blue perspective. Okay, so red, that is the dyed in the wool steak eating, large block pickup driving Republicans, right? The blue, that is your more vegan more vegan side, climate change concerned Democrats, right? And what is the white? The white is it's a bridge, right? So there are people on the red and there are people on the blue in this country, and the white is a bridge between the two of them. And I think the bridge is honesty, and the bridge is logic. Okay, and you can find honesty and logic on both the red and the blue side at times. It is, and I will say, this bridge is in desperate need of repair, right? But let's talk about the red, the blue, and the red, white, and blue of the closing of the comic book shop. So first and foremost, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what comic books mean to me. Comic books mean a huge amount to me. I'm a huge comic book fan. I bought my first comic book in Racine, Wisconsin. I lived in Wisconsin. I think I was probably 9 or 10 years old. I think the comic book cost maybe 40 cents, between like 40 and 60 cents. And and this was in the late 70s, early 80s. And I remember very distinctly, just buying this thing with my own money at a convenience store off of a rack, and just pulling it off of one of those spinner racks. Right, it wasn't bought at a comic book shop. And I remember, building a large collection. I built a very large collection of comic books, and to this day, I have a very pared down, very limited collection. I bought quite a few comic books, and I'm a husband with 4 kids, and I remember distinctly selling off my comic books at different times. Back in I'd say the late '90s. Yeah, I was just I was a husband and a father, and we really didn't have a lot of money, and I needed to literally sell my comic books when we needed to pay the rent or something like that, when we were tight. There were some tight years for the Garabays. We're past those years. I'm incredibly blessed, but I've been on both sides. I've bought comic books. I've bought Batman. I have on the DC side, Batman and Robin. Batman is the best superhero of all superheroes in comic books. So I've had a lot of Batman and Robin. A lot of, and of course, lots of comics with Batman's villains, Catwoman and Penguin. Penguin is one of my favorite villains. Just a whole rogues gallery. Nightwing, the whole Bat family. There's just some great ones, but even some really off the beaten path. Blue Devil, I was a really big fan of him. Teen Titans, huge fan of Teen Titans. Really, really important to me, special to me. Just love those comics. And DC is, I really like DC, but can't nobody deny Marvel crushes it. They crush it in. And by the way, everything I'm talking about right now, I'm talking about real deal comic books. 24 pages, bag and board, corrugated white boxes, the real deal. We're not talking about shows. We're not talking about video games. We're not talking about movies. We're talking about real comic books here, right? But when it comes to Marvel, boy, man, Hulk, X-Men. 3 out of 4 of my children have an X-Men name in their name. There's a story for why the fourth one doesn't, it's a source of pain, but it's just one of those things. Life is complicated and challenging. But X-Men, I'm a huge X-Men fan. Cyclops and Wolverine. There's just so many great X-Men, and X-Men is really one of my favorite titles. I actually, surprisingly, have never been a Spider-Man fan. I've never really bought a few Spider-Man comics and never picked them up again. I'm not a Spider-Man fan, but I absolutely am a huge Marvel fan. Cloak and Dagger is one of my favorites, and Captain Hulk, and more than any other comic book, actually Frank Castle, the Punisher, huge fan. I collected the entire Punisher line, and I actually owned the first appearance of Frank Castle in a Spider-Man comic, of the Punisher in a Spider-Man comic. Again, sold that for about $200. It was, and bought it for about 10. Yeah, I think at like a garage sale, and kept it for about 10 years and then resold it. It's rough, So, but I'm a huge comic book fan, and so seeing comic shops close is terrible. And I will say right now, there's going to come a reckoning. Those shops should not have been closed. They really shouldn't have. I think what's going to come out after coronavirus is done is that this whole essentials thing was a ruse, and it was horribly mismanaged. I think what we should have done is kept every single business open and put in strong restrictions on all places so that no place would have more than like five people in a shop. And the reality is, I absolutely think the comic shops were 100% essential. And the reason why I believe that is I'm trying to be respectful of mental health concerns. I have been dismissive of those in the past, I think, and not really fully understanding that people truly need mental health services the same way they need physical health services. And if you buy into that, then you really can't take almost anything away from anybody, because anybody's mental health can rely on these things. And I will tell you right now, I definitely know people whose mental health was detrimentally impacted by the closing of the comic shops. Mine among them, right? And I really think it was a huge mistake to close the shops. So one, that is the Reds' fault. Donald Trump should have kept all businesses open and then done very stringent restrictions to not allow any, more than like 10 people. Or I would say what I would have done is say, hey, you can go to your max capacity, but at a lower rate of like 10%. So you can only go to 10% of your max capacity. Every business remains open. I think restricting businesses to essentials and then literally keeping convenience stores open, outrageous. Convenience stores were open all over the country. Every single thing they sold was duplicative. And it told the American people that this essentials thing is horribly being executed. And I think it was a horrible mistake. And honestly, I think there's been massive damage done to the comic industry because of that change. However, the comic industry proved to be horribly unprepared for what happened. They had a single point of failure, which was the Diamond Distribution Group, and basically right before Corona, they were coming to an absolutely critical juncture where they were having an incredibly hard time physically distributing comic books. And the comic book industry, the thousands of comic book shops all over the country, should have banded together, should have gotten some kind of confederation to deal with and make sure that they had a backup for the Diamond Distribution Group that ended up folding and not being able to distribute physical comic books. Now, that on that side, that doesn't really that whose fault is that? That is Republicans' fault, and the reason why is the reality is when it comes to small business, let's not pretend. The Republicans have always been much, much better supporters of small business. I really don't think that the Democrats are genuinely back small businesses. And the reason why is small business owners almost never are Democrats. They aren't. It's period. Right? A small business owner, you're going to be, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's those kind of people are generally Republicans, right? I'm talking at the macro level. I'm talking at the 51% level, right? Maybe 49% of, honestly, I'd be surprised if even 1 out of 5 small business owners was Democrat. So these small businesses, all comic book shops are small businesses, period. End of sentence, right? Even the Midwest shops in New York City, I've been to them. I've been to the bigger ones in America. They're all small businesses. And again, the Republicans absolutely failed them. Now, we can't go too hard on the Republicans there because the Democrats, they don't give two licks. I think generally Democrats do not give two licks about comic books. Comic books really are a very Republican thing, and the Democrats really have never done a great job of interacting with them and giving business to the comic book shops. And I've been into a lot of comic book shops. Literally, the 2 comic book shops that are within, actually, oh, you know what? Let's do it. There are 4 comic book shops within 20 miles of my house. 3 of them are dyed-in-the-wool Republican owners. I know them all. And one of them, actually, is very dyed-in-the-wool, very Democrat, right? So that is 75% Republican, 25% Democrat, from my local area. But the reality is, I really think the fault for this, for not making sure that the comic book small industry was better prepared, falls more on the Republicans than on the Democrats. And when I say that, I don't mean like senators, right? I mean the Republican voter base and the Democrat voter base. We are these parties. We are the Democrats and the Republicans. I'm a registered Democrat right now. I will be desperately looking for somebody to vote for. I certainly hope it isn't Biden. That guy is just shedding voters like ooh, like a dog, like a cat sheds hair, right? It's just like, boy, it seems to get worse every day. It's pretty bad. It's just terrible candidate from every single perspective. I cannot believe that the Blue Power Base has left us with this weak of a candidate. But the reality is, this comic book, the shutting of the comic books, I think the responsibility for this absolutely falls on the Republicans. They should have done more to help their true voter base here. The Democrats, they're marginally invested in this industry. I don't think it really ever fell on them to save it, right? And just so you're aware, when it comes to Democrats and the comic book industry, what I've really seen is the Democrats have gotten a stronger and stronger number, a higher and higher number of writers and designers into the industry to make books that absolutely no one wants to buy. It's been really bad. So the blue has really infiltrated the comic book industry, and they've been able to make books that really carry a blue message, and have absolutely tanked the sales numbers ridiculously badly. So this is truly a massive loss on the part of America. So actually, let's talk about. So we've talked about the red, we've talked about the blue. Let's talk about the white, right? What is the honest logic? How can we be honest about this industry and how our government should interact with it? And what is the logical steps our government should take to aid the comic book industry if there are one? So I think from an honesty perspective on the blue and the red is one. I think the blue should step back from comic books, right? I think Democrat voters should really stop whining about the content that is created in most comic books, and give this industry to the Reds. Because I would say easily 80 to 90% of all actual comic book readers are Republicans, and that Democrats generally do not really care about this industry whatsoever, right? They want their message to be carried in it, and I get that, right? But they don't really buy the books in large numbers. They don't, and they are absolutely horrific for sales, right? So just for for honesty's sake, I really think Democrats should stop vocally requesting their messages to be carried in the comic book, and give this over to the Republicans generally, and allow them to tell the stories they want to tell. That's just my take. What can they do logically? I think both the red and the blue logically need to very, very carefully acknowledge that the government needs to be involved in this industry. And again, I'm talking comic books, 24 pages, full color, bag and board, baby. Right? I'm not talking about video games here. I'm not talking about movies here. I am not talking about any of those things. But I think it's really critically important that this industry survive. And the thing is, you cannot let American industries die. And the reason why is they're just too critically important, right? This is the goose that laid the golden egg. And I'll tell you right now, Hollywood cannot be trusted to realize that the real stories, the real ideas, the real energy for comic books comes from the writers and the fans, right? And that what they're doing at the movie level and at the video game level is pure garbage trash layer on top of the gold, okay? Comparatively. Actually, you know what? I'll say this out loud. I have never watched a live action superhero show, not once, that I enjoyed. That is a true trash layer. Animated stuff, some incredible stuff there, okay? Movies, some good movies made, right? Some video games, I don't play them that much. I'll give an NA on me. I won't speak to but I highly doubt the video games. Well, you know what? I can tell you right now, there have been no good comic book video game movies, comic book video games. You know how I know that? Because video games have terrible stories. And you know how I know that? Because I think you can count on one hand the number of good video game movies there have ever been in the history of video games, and have 3 fingers left over, right? So I'm pretty sure there's no decent comic video games out there as well. But even the leftover scraps rubbish that they call these comic book movies, the animated shows, and the video games, that stuff is pretty good because the comic books themselves are so incredible, right? Even the dross leftover of the comic book industry turned into movies, video games, and movies and video games turn out to be, and animated shows turn out to be pretty good, because the comic book industry itself, when it comes to narrative and powerful stories and imagery and heroism, it is refined gold. And this industry needs to be carefully protected. And so when we come out of this, I really want our blue and our red senators to find their white logical hearts, right? Now, I understand the term white is a little bit problematic. We're talking red, white, and blue, the colors of the flag, nothing more. The imagery does not go any further than that. And by the way, I am Mattapanai, Indian, and Basque. So, just in case, to just put my bona fides out there. All right, so that they really need to do the right thing and give the comic book industry, I would say, tax breaks, policy breaks, and I really, if I were the government, whoever is in charge on January 21st, 2021, I would send somebody to aid them in setting up a new distribution channel, because it's desperately needed. All of that is my opinion. What do you think? Who do you think is responsible for the really very difficult state of the comic book industry right now? Do you think it's more Republicans or more Democrats that allowed this very tragic state to arise? And what steps do you think that they should do to help this industry? I'd love to hear your opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.